Could the Targaryens have won Robert's rebellion? Tom, who picked this topic? Oh, our good friend Alex. Well, Robert's got something to say to him.
Your mother was a dumb whore with a fat arse. Did you know that?
I showed these cretins favour, and how do they reward my magnanimous generosity? By taking a knife and shoving it straight in my heart. Fires! The fires for all of them! Don't forget to like, hype and subscribe, Patreon's here, and if you too would like a chance to request outright treason by claiming victory in our trial by trivia contests, our Discord is the place to be. Link in the description. And that should appease the algorithm. Let's dive in. This is Could They Have Won, not Could They Have Prevented. The conflict has kicked off in earnest, Rhaegar has absconded with Lyanna, the Mad King has burned wardens, heirs, called for heads, and released a diss track for little man Tywin. We're at the point where there is no solving this diplomatically without at least some bloodshed.
Aggressive negotiations.
So, could the Targs have won? Nope. And here's why. The House of the Dragon has been waning for a while now. And not because Condor has gone off book, but instead because the Targaryens no longer possess their dragons, which was ultimately where about 99% of their power lay. At this point, their influence was hanging by a thread anyway. But Aerys, in all his divinely imbued wisdom, has decided keeping his house's foundations on quicksand is rather boring. And dunking it in wildfire might spice things up by making the political animosity extremely personal for his enemies, especially after chucking a few of their friends and family on a bonfire. Not to mention pissing off and alienating his allies who might have made a difference in the inevitable conflict. Speaking of allies and enemies, this here is not a very balanced game board. On one side, you've got the Stormlands, the Vale, the Riverlands, and the fucking North, and on the other, you've got the Crownlands, Dawn, and the Reach, with everyone else, well, if we're talking about the factions that are consequential, the Westerlands, sitting on the bench of neutrality, looking at the scoreboard before deciding which team they want to play on. To put that in layman's terms, that's the region noted for producing some of the most elite warriors in Westeros, buddying up with the region that is noted for producing the finest knights in the realm, buddying up with the region most experienced in war and conflict, buddying up with the region that, on paper, should be a bunch of scruffy, technologically disadvantaged Avens, but in practice of whom have a military track record that inexplicably outshines everyone else's. Going up against a region with a resource drain so massive it can't self-sustain, a region famously bad at fighting anywhere that isn't their home turf, and the only region on this team that's actually worth a damn and is thus breaking its back to carry the other two. Even though there are loyalist pockets in these regions, the rebel side is basically the United States basketball team at the Olympics. But not only that, it's also tied together with a perfect storm of political alliances and strong familial bonds within their leadership. Leadership, which by the way sports some of the finest military talents of the generation, and the face of which is so ridiculously charismatic that, so long as they survive the battle, odds are he's going to be the new best friend and drinking buddy to even the staunchest of dragon backers. You know, so long as your name doesn't end in Targaryen. The Loyalists have the Reach, which brings Randall Tarly, and, you know, that's certainly not a bad card to have in your deck. They've also supposedly got Dawn and the Kingsguard. Though, worth noting, half of these white-cloaked ninnies have seemingly vanished out of existence. Numerically, the Targs have the superior force.
And?
Seriously, that's all they've really got going for them. Despite having the bigger army, the Loyalists are saddled with a minus 10,000 debuff to command and army morale because their figurehead is Aerys. Contrasted against Bobby, who will have a pint with you, praise your honor, and respectfully toast your fallen after a dust-up, Aerys might wake up one morning thinking, you know what? My best mate would look awfully good on a pyre of wildfire. TLDR, you can't undersell just how unmotivated Aerys' own army is to fight for him, and how much Bobby's lads were metaphorically banging on their chests as they charge into battle. Though, things could have looked a little more even for the Mad King had he not decided to take a self-inflicted crossbow bolt directly into his own foot. Now, I personally don't really like Tywin, but I can honestly say this is one instance where I don't blame the old... Wait, is it young Lionel? Fuck it. Anyway, I don't blame him at all for finally snapping, pissing off back home, and denying the Mad King's request for aid. A man can only tolerate so much shit, and Aerys had been using Tywin's image as his personal privy. Thanks entirely to the Mad King throwing copious amounts of shade at his most capable subordinate, this robbed the crown of the Westerlands, whom sport the second largest army in Westeros behind the Reach, with a maybe not amazing but definitely capable military commander, and certainly an S-tier politician at its head. On their own, they are both quite formidable. But if the War of the Five Kings has taught us anything, it's that if the Westerlands are teamed up with the Reach, then it's game over. The Lions are situated perfectly to pick off the Riverlands, and Gaz the North an awful lot of trouble getting into fight where they need to be. Not to mention, having Tywin still on his hand would, without any fucking doubt, have been far more effective than the Mad King and whomever was his hand of the week. To the degree, Robert might not have survived the Battle of the Bells had Tywin and his army been sicked on him instead. Tywin's ruthlessness likely would have seen the Battle of the Bells turn into the Burning of the Bells, making Stony Set a Targaryen funeral pyre for Robert. The irony of which Bobby would absolutely fucking hate. But nope, this doesn't come to be because the lion stayed in his cave, and yep, that's entirely on you, Aerys. Haha, get fucked, dragon humpers. Ours is the fury. As you can see, it's looking quite hopeless for the Targs on all fronts. And that's before factoring they're suffering several instances of just plain old bad luck, with both Robert and Ned evading what should have been an easy capture at least once, and prevailing over bad luck situations of their own. Is there any hope? Any moment that were certain players to make a different choice could shift the tides and reverse the direction of the war without us just forcing in tons of contrivance and obnoxious levels of luck? Because those filthy traitors who requested this video did ask if McGuffin Muffins and Deus Ex Oats could be taken off the menu for this one. Just one. And it's nothing short of a long shot, and I'm going to be transparent here, it totally has the potential to set off chain reactions that just level things back out in favor of the rebels. We can fanfic all we like about putting Arthur Dayne on the field at the Trident and how that would somehow mean Robert would be killed or captured and Rhaegar would live. You know, despite the fact Sir Barristan was present at the Trident, and despite being a unit on par with Daddy Dayne could do precisely fuck all to influence either of these things, but really and truly, the make or break for the Loyalists having a chance, just a chance, lay in the smaller opening engagement known as the Battle of Ashford. Or, well, the decision made directly after it. This is the one and only time Robert is pushed onto the back foot, and a legitimate opportunity to capture or kill him is presented. After this, Robert learns from his folly, is backed by his allies, and absolutely no one on the Trident was going to stop him killing every Targaryen he could get his hands on. During this battle, Tarly's vanguard catches Robert on the hop and overruns his army, along with Robert being wounded in the process. So, double serving of suck salad there for the beastie Baratheon, which forces the Bobstar to hightail it out of there before the main Tyrell host rocks up and overwhelms him, handing Robert his one defeat of the entire rebellion. It's here the Loyalists were presented with a fateful choice. Pursue Robert's army and destroy it while it was still a little shook, or invade the Stormlands and take Robert's seat from under him. It's believed Tarly wished to employ option 1, but in the end, glory-snatching Mace Tyrell opted for option 2. and since he was the head of the Reach, what he said went. Mace often, and rather unfairly, gets a lot of flack for picking the latter approach, but the truth is, neither of these was actually a bad option. Taking the Stormlands and Storm's End was baiting Robert to come back down and reclaim his keep, because as we all know, it's a huge blow to a noble's pride to lose your seat, and it would have damaged the morale of Robert's army to see Storm's End fall and his heirs captured. Then you have to consider Mace's own self-interest here. He was likely very aware the crown was in the shit, and that with no confirmation of the Westerlands having yet jumped in, his region was hard carrying the team, making a loyalist defeat a very real possibility. People think he's being lazy or foolish, but what he's really doing is hedging his bets for either side. If the crown wins, he can say, "Hey, look, I was helping." And if the rebels win, he can say, "Look, I haven't done any real harm here, have I? So maybe put it there and let bygones be bygones. Hey." There was also great risk in pursuing Robert. It was absolutely not the sure thing many think it to be. Robert's very formidable allies are up north. And in which direction is Robert retreating? Up fucking north. Then consider, this is not Balon the Bellend you're chasing after, this is Robert fucking Baratheon. Only guy to win the Game of Thrones without a dragon, and one of the greatest military commanders of the day. His army wasn't smashed into rabble at Ashford, it retreated in good order and remained a perfectly intact fighting force. Tarly had the advantage on his home turf in the Reach, but would he have fared as well in foreign terrain if Robert did decide to draw a line in the sand in a location favourable to his forces? While his buddies marched down to back him up? I would still favour Tarly because of the sheer overwhelming force, but then as Rob Stark showed us in War at Five Kings, overwhelming force ain't the be-all and end-all when the commander is skilled, like Robert undoubtedly was. Anyway, I think the risk in the pursuit plan is often overlooked, and it wasn't exactly moronic of Mace to hope that since Robert was heading north in his retreat and bringing himself dangerously close to the Westerlands, that Tywin, who at this point is believed to still be a loyalist, would cut Bobby off and finish the job anyway. It's also a very clever way for Mace to gauge which side of the conflict Tywin is leaning towards. What I'm saying here is, don't dunk on Mace too much for making the choice he did. It was perfectly logical, especially considering how unhinged Aerys was. But defense of Mace the Ace aside, with reader hindsight, we now know any hope of a loyalist victory rested on Mace rolling the dice, listening to Tarly, pursuing Robert, hopefully catching him before he makes it far enough north, and then committing their army to the wider conflict to give the loyalists the overwhelming force they needed to crush the rebels. Capturing or killing Robert doesn't of course mean Ned, Jon and Hoster just lay down. It's not fucking chess where if you check the king it's game over. These are people, not game pieces, all of whom have suffered slights and heartbreak at the hands of the House of the Dragon, but things do go south real fast. Just as Rhaegar was important for the loyalists, you could argue the same applied for Robert. It's a critical hit on morale since you've just deprived the rebels of their best claimant to the throne, a valid show of force and strength, which in turn may win over those who haven't yet picked a side, and if captured instead of killed, the loyalists are now holding a leverageable hostage to pacify the Stormlands. But it's very important to note there is legitimate risk invoked with the Reach's army getting more stuck in, especially if they don't manage to capture or kill Robert specifically, whom the events of the Cannon Rebellion showed could be one slippery fucker when he wanted to be. Sure, people are going to point out that an extra 40k loyalists at the Trident would have been game-changing, and by golly, it would have been. But with the loyalists presenting a much greater numerical threat, it also may have expedited Jon Arryn endeavouring to secure Tywin and the Westerlands by fast-track promising Robert's hand to Cersei. Yes, Tywin is sat on the bench weighing up which side he thinks will win before committing. But I think it's fair to speculate he was probably leaning slightly more towards a rebel victory, since 1, he wants vengeance on Aerys for slighting him, because petty bitch, and 2, it gives him a breezy path into the royal fold that Aerys had so kindly snubbed him of. It's a juicy offer, and since the Reach's more direct involvement would make the rebels incredibly desperate, Tywin can basically name his terms. And with the lions in the fray, that levels it back out in favor of the rebels, since they've now got the full playset of the most martially minded regions on one side, and numbers to at least contend with the Reach. Though, while a strong offer, we'd be remiss if we don't point out that Jaime being at King's Landing could maybe keep the line of Casterly Rock in his cave. As with any sort of what-if scenario, it's a case of maybe, maybe not, probably maybe not, but still worth considering. But let's say ours is not the Fury, and the Tyrells do catch Bobby and either shackle him up or forever nap him. And in doing so, hopefully keeping Tywin neutral. Even that isn't a loyalist victory. Yet. The Roses have merely bought the House of the Dragon a teeny bit of breathing room. Immediately, and I mean immediately following this, one Prince Rhaegar Targaryen needs to make some wise choices. And now he's no longer at risk of being one-shotted by the Targaryen 9000, he can start by coming out of hiding, gathering the Kingsguard loyal to him and any other support he can muster, and heading straight to King's Landing to remove his father from the throne. Forcefully, if needs be, before anyone else can get to the capital. The Mad King has done too much damage to the Targaryen name and made this whole rebellion extremely personal with his cruelty. He cannot be allowed to stay in that stabby chair. Even if the Natter did on a whim decide he all of a sudden wanted to make peace with the rebels, they would never trust him after all he's done. On the other hand, if Rhaegar removes Aerys, in conjunction with having Robert in irons or in the dirt, he's absolutely not squashed the anger or resentment, but he has effectively made the North, Vale, Riverlands, and Stormlands now rebels without a cause. Doing it personally and willingly is also a necessary acknowledgement of his father's wrongdoing and a show of good faith with the rebels. Is it guaranteed to get the rebels behind a table for peace talks? Tom argues yes and makes a fair case. I argue, possibly. Though I wouldn't bet all my gold dragons on it. For Hoster Tully, he has his daughters married off to Jon Arryn and Ned Stark, and settling now with a new king means his line can strengthen. Jon and Ned... much more of an uphill battle due to all they've suffered. Not to mention, if Robert was killed instead of captured, that's Jon's adoptive son and Ned's adoptive brother. The desire for vengeance will be far greater than would have been roused were it merely the death of a close political ally. And even after that, Rhaegar has a shit ton of explaining to do, especially where Ned is concerned. However, without Robert and Aerys, the rebellion loses so much steam that conversations can possibly be had, even if it's through gritted teeth. Reason winning out over vengeful wrath, and the hope that R+L=J is true, and thus hopefully Baby Jon can act as a small bridge builder. It's honestly the best the House of the Dragon can hope for at this point. Is it truly winning? I don't think so. Rhaegar may be crowned king, but even if the Targaryens remain on the throne, they've still got a metric fuck-ton of bitterness, animosity, and the general hatred of 4 of their 7 kingdoms to deal with for many years to come. Not to mention, with the reveal of Baby Jon, Elia and Dawn aren't going to be very happy, so that's a future bridge to cross. And still, even in victory, without dragons, the Targaryens remain an ever-diminishing power, only really held up by the sheer strength of the Reach's back. How long until the flowers get fed up of holding them up? It's a very real question. Rhaegar's foundations for his reign are barely any better than that of his father's, if not more volatile. The fall of the Targaryen dynasty has been inevitable since the fall of their dragons. Winning this rebellion would not secure its future. It would have simply dragged out its death. Robert wasn't so much toppling a dynasty as much as he was performing a mercy killing of it, which, however unintentional, has actually allowed fate to give the Targaryens one last chance to show their quality by rising from the ashes in a way victory in this rebellion never could. Danny, please don't go mad. And that's our take. Alex and co, I will wave to you as I set fire to the pyres you will be hoisted on for your treason.
Oh, it's not Liam! Jesus Christ,
Okay,
don't burn
Sir
me!
Liam,
I beg of
please,
thee! I don't want to
put away the
die!
paper.
I'll even pray to Lord
You know
Stannis.
the
Even though I
wildfire's
really don't like
flammable.
you, but
I
still,
beg you,
please have
please.
mercy on me!
We can talk about this.